In this video, we will talk about visual thinking, what is it, and why is that important. We will start by opening our workbook here on the first page, and you just follow me along. And if you cannot keep up with my speed, then don't worry. There is nothing wrong in pausing and catching up. So just take your time, either follow me along if you can make it, or pause the video and catch up. So, the visual thinking. Here I'm going to introduce you to the term, the way I understand that. And the way I explain visual thinking to people is that I start by drawing a person in the center. So here is our person, and it's me or it's you or someone else. And visual thinking starts with the information. Today we're bathing with a lot of complex and convoluted information. We're dealing with a lot of complexity. And that information is predominantly a verbal form. It's a sequence of words and words and words that we are untangling for a huge ball of yarn of this information, and we are consuming that information word by word, trying to make a sense out of it. This information is usually coming from two major sources. One is conversations. And you can imagine a meeting, or you listening to someone talking, or maybe you are participating in a conference, or maybe you're listening to a podcast or news. So you hear that information. And the other major source for the linear information we're consuming is reading. It can be a book, it can be an email from your colleague, or it can be an article on some social media post on your smartphone or your tablet, and you read it. And the information is really complex. There are a lot of words with confusing meanings, and we're trying to make a sense out of it. What happens inside of our head is a very complex and largely unknown process. And there is neuroscience which is trying to answer the question how our brains operate and how we come up with the concepts, how do we process and store information. And again, largely we don't know. There are competing theories that are trying to shed some light on how the brain operates. And if we are just casting aside those theories and the details, and we focus on something that these theories agree upon, is there is a certain mental model which our brains are capable to operate. And for example, in the propositional theory, which suggests that the mental models which are processed by our brains are based on some basic concepts as images stored in our heads and the connections or relationship between those concepts. And I like that theory. So in that theory, our brains is breaking down all of the information into concepts, images, and the relations between those. And these constructs, these structures, are semi-verbal, semi-visual, meaning that they can be represented as a spatial model, something that you could graphically represent, and maybe our brains can see the structure as a diagram at the same time as being capable of reading through those structures to interpret them into a verbal information. So if that is true, then getting back to how we consume the information in the linear format of a verbally represented information, then we can say that our brain is doing a job of interpreting and decoding the linear information to come up with the mental models that correspond to those pieces of information we consume. So you could say there is a very complex and effort-taking process of interpreting the linear information to come up with those mental models inside of our heads. And what people have noticed, including myself, is that whenever we're dealing with this information, which is convoluted and complicated, and at the same time we're grabbing a pen or a stylus for our digital device, and as we try to process and understand the information we're dealing with, if we are drawing something at the same time as thinking about this information, and as we try to do the job of our brain by coming up with those visual representations of this information at the same time as consuming it, then the process of getting to the bottom of the things, the process of interpreting the information, is much more effective. That is what the visual thinking is for me. Therefore, visual thinking for me is a process of using the externalized images to support the process of interpreting the heard or read information into correct or useful mental models faster, more effectively, and with more fun. So once again, whenever you're hearing or reading the information, try to draw a concept or a mental model that you think supports that information the most. That way, you will help your brain to do the job the most effective and efficient way, and avoiding the confusion and frustrations that can result from, you could say, insufficient process of coming up with those mental models unsupported with the visuals. And it's also a huge fun to do things like that. So let's talk about why that is so important. What are the values of the process? Values and benefits. And the way I draw a value, I usually use this icon for a gem or a diamond to also visually code the concept of a value. So first of all, when you use visual thinking the way I explained it, you are more effective. You are also smarter, because you don't get lost in all of this convoluted information. You're not confused. You are pinpointing the confusion by trying to come up with a mental model through the externalized image, and you know exactly where you're lacking inside or where you nailed the information the right way. Second, you communicate better. Because when you have to explain something really, really complex, and let's say you took a piece of paper and you tried to explain it to your colleague with a supporting visual to help them arrive to the correct or a more or less precise mental model that supports this information faster, then they can understand you better. How many times you had the feeling that someone just pretends to understand you? They say, oh yeah, I got it, but I understand it now. But all is happening is they just want to speed through uncomfortable situation and just get over with it. But did they really understand, or did they just want to be polite with you? Having a supporting drawing to help you explain it more clearly can actually make the understanding happening. And that's the essence of communicating. The essence of communicating is making sure you are understood, or you understand a person who is communicating with you. Thirdly, visual thinking is a great tool for collaboration. So you collaborate better. What I mean here is that whenever you're in a situation of a workshop or a problem-solving session, when you use visuals to support the communication and the conversation between colleagues, you can make sure that the group is making decisions in a more effective way, being informed better. But you also make sure that you untangle the confusing situations faster, because sometimes people cannot move forward simply because they're not getting on the same page. And by using the externalized diagrams of what you're discussing can create a better information of the situation for everyone involved in that situation. And then finally, number 4 here is it is super fun. It is super fun, at least for me. I cannot imagine myself not being able to use drawings in my professional life, because then, I don't know, my regular day would be so grim and boring and would be lacking the edge of creativity. So that's what visual thinking is for me, along with its values and benefits. And this is also the exercise for you to try and sketch note something down with this technique, where you combine words and images. And again, the gold plating time. First, I'm applying the shadows like this, and watch me applying shadows to everything that is virtually material, meaning something that can drop a shadow. And also, please notice that whenever I'm adding a shadow to the drawing, I choose the position for the light source to be placed somewhere in the bottom left corner. So I just imagine the rays of that imaginable source of light emanating from that point, and then once they hit something which is material, it is naturally dropping a shadow from the opposite right side of the object. And therefore, if I have anything on the paper which is presumably material, then it will drop a shadow on its right side. So once I'm done with the shadows, it's easier for me to see where I'm lacking the highlights, because this piece of paper became a bit too convoluted and too overloaded with the detail, and I want important pieces to stand out. Pieces like, for example, the title of the page, also some key words like here, information, read, draw, mental models, and so forth. And then finally, whenever you have some numbered lists like 1, 2, 3, and 4 for my values and benefits, it's also recommendable that you highlight the numbers itself. So it's easier for you to capture where are the chunks of informations located. Alright, so if you had brush pens and you followed me along, this is how your next page could look like. And with this we conclude this particular part where we have the introduction into visual thinking. I hope you liked and enjoyed it and ready to proceed with the next part.